Good to have you here, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Trish. Welcome to the White House.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've never seen anything, historically speaking, quite like this. I mean, the divisiveness right now, the lack of bipartisanship, not one single Republican voted to have an impeachment inquiry. What's going on?
Well, what the American people are witnessing is 3 years of endless investigations and a partisan impeachment. I mean, the only bipartisan vote on Capitol Hill last week was the vote against moving forward with the inquiry. And that should speak volumes about the process that's underway here. I mean, an inquiry that's taking place behind closed doors with selective leaks of depositions. And now they're beginning to feel the pressure. And so some of those transcripts are coming out. But at the end of the day, the American people have the transcript. They can read the transcript of the call and see that President Trump did nothing wrong. There was no quid pro quo. President Zelensky of Ukraine has said repeatedly, there was no pressure. And our aid to Ukraine was released. And I couldn't be more proud of the strong stand this administration has taken against Russian aggression in Ukraine. Remember, the last administration only sent pillows to Ukraine. They refused to send military aid. But President Trump from early on made it clear that we were not going to tolerate Russian aggression and the war that they fomented in the Donbass province. And we provided lethal aid, military assistance. And frankly, we've called on leaders across Europe to join us, to do more. But in the midst of all of that, we're back to this process in Congress that really literally began on Inauguration Day. And I think the American people are tired of it. Everywhere I go across the country, the American people see this for what it is. It's a partisan impeachment. And what they want to see is an end to endless investigations and see this Congress go back to work on the issues that are going to make a real difference in the life of this nation.
Well, they're about to see a whole lot more of it because we've got word that Adam Schiff is actually going to start televising this. You're going to have the first public hearing, if you would, next Wednesday. So how does that play? Do you think people get fatigued by that because they say, OK, here they're off on this tangent on the Ukraine stuff, as opposed to focusing on policy that's going to matter for my pocketbook and will matter for my safety?
Look what's happening around the world, and look what's happening across this country, and look what Congress is focused on under Speaker Pelosi and Adam Schiff's efforts. I mean, around the world, we have a ceasefire that's holding along the northern border of Syria, thanks to the strong stand that President Trump has taken. Our armed forces, at the direction of our commander-in-chief, 1 week ago took out the leader of ISIS and other ISIS leaders, and America and the world are safer as a result. And as you know, Trish, the stock market is soaring. Set 3 new records yesterday alone, improving the savings, the pocketbooks, the pensions of millions of Americans because of President Trump's leadership, cutting taxes, rolling back regulation, fighting for free and fair trade. And yet in the midst of all of that, here the Democrats are with their partisan impeachment. And all the while, the largest trade deal in American history has been sitting on Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk for more than a year. The USMCA would create more than 175,000 new jobs right out of the gate, create more wealth in this country, and yet this is what Democrats are focused on.
They're a little bit like a dog with a bone right now. The Gordon Sondland testimony, I got to ask you about that, because he testified one thing, and then he's effectively reversing it, now saying, well, you know, there was a quid pro quo, after having said previously there was no quid pro quo. So let me ask you about this. You went to Warsaw September 1, and you met with President Zelensky then. Did you say to him, the money is contingent upon you offering something up in the way of a statement, whatever it may be, on how you're handling corruption?
Oh, of course not. No.
You didn't?
No, our focus entirely in the meeting that I took with President Zelensky, after President Trump had to stay here in the States to deal with the onrushing hurricane, was entirely focused on our support for the territorial integrity and security of Ukraine. And it was focused on President Trump's desire to see President Zelensky succeed in his agenda of moving anti-corruption legislation. I can tell you in my conversation with President Zelensky, he had just come off a great legislative elections, and he had told me that they'd elected more than 250 members of his party in a large majority, and they'd already introduced almost as many bills to combat corruption. He also told me that he agreed with President Trump that the European community needed to do more to support Ukraine, and he agreed to work with us to call on the European community. But that was the focus entirely, Trish.
So you never said, listen, you know, if you want to get this nearly $400 million, you got to do something on corruption.
Oh, of course not. Of course not. Okay. Other than to say that we wanted to support his efforts to deal with corruption in Ukraine, to deal with
which is a
corruption.
Legitimate thing to ask for.
Well, it's not only legitimate, it's what he ran on. President Zelensky had an extraordinary victory in his campaign because he ran on an anti-corruption theme. And President Trump made it clear from early on that we wanted to support him in that effort, we wanted to see him make progress in that effort, and we wanted to see the European community come forward.
Did Joe Biden come up? Did Hunter Biden come up in the conversation?
No, he did not at all, and I said that at the time. But look, here's the point is, whether it was my conversation with President Zelensky, whether it was President Trump's telephone call in July, I mean, where the American people can read the transcript. I just think what the American people have here is... It was helpful, don't you think, to the American people to release that transcript? Because the president said, okay, here it is. You know, so all these allegations you can see for yourself. Yeah, I think it demonstrated this president's commitment to transparency. And the fact will you do the same with your phone calls? Well, I've said I have no objection at all. And we're working with White House counsel about that. I've had a couple of telephone calls with President Zelensky, but all of them were focused on the same topics. Look, we have supported Ukraine against Russian aggression. We provided that military assistance. But President Trump made it clear from early on that we wanted to see Ukraine make progress on corruption, and we wanted to see the European community do more. And after I returned from Poland, I reported to the president on all the progress that Ukraine had made under President Zelensky's leadership, and the support for Ukraine was released. And the United States has a strong relationship with Ukraine, will continue to stand strongly with them. But at the end of the day, again, remember, the whistleblower was all about a telephone call. And maybe some of the president's critics didn't expect him to release the transcript, but he did, and he did readily. And now the American people can read the transcript. They can see for themselves there was no quid pro quo. The president did nothing wrong. Would you do the same? And the American people want to see, want to see this Congress start to focus on what's important. Yeah,
listen, I think it probably disarmed all the Democrats that were thinking they had something by him doing that. So, again, you're working on it, you're looking at it, you're thinking about it, releasing your own transcripts.
Oh, as I've said before, I'd have no objection to releasing the transcripts of a couple of telephone calls that I had with President Zelensky. And again, they were all about the very same issues. Look, it's been my great honor as vice president to represent this president in the United States in meetings with world leaders over the last 3 years. And when the president asked me to fill in Poland to go at what was a commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the beginning of World War II, he'd already scheduled a meeting with President Zelensky. President Trump had agreed to meet with President Zelensky in Poland, and he asked me to go ahead and take that meeting. And so I carried with him that message. We had a great conversation. And as I said, after I returned, all the support to Ukraine. And you had seen the briefing, right? I mean, you had a transcript anyway of the conversation that had taken place on the 25th. You had that in your packet, so you were somewhat familiar, right? Well, I'm told that it was delivered to me, but, you know, I've received literally hundreds of transcripts over the time. I don't recall ever reading it in specific, but it doesn't mean that I did. But had I read it, it wouldn't have mattered because the president did nothing wrong. There was no quid pro quo. The president brought up issues that were important to the American people. And I think anyone who takes time to read the transcript will see just that. Gotta want to know. The president has got to want to know how everything happened in the first place, right? How is it that this Christopher Steele over in the UK is writing this thing up and calling his former KGB buddies, and they're feeding all this intel, by the way, commissioned by the opposition,
right? So the opposition is paying for foreign intel on our now president. You've got to wonder, how did that happen? He's got to wonder that. And so is there a part of you, is there a part of him that's saying, I'm just going to keep looking, you know, no stone unturned. We need to find out why this happened.
We spent much of the last 3 years focused on foreign interference in the 2016 election. And at the end of the day, the Justice Department confirmed there was no collusion, no obstruction, case closed. But that didn't mean there wasn't foreign interference. And understanding where all of that began is something the American people have a right to know, Trish. And the President and the Attorney General are making efforts with a well-known prosecutor who's looking into this matter. We have every confidence that they'll get to the bottom of it. But this isn't about whether the President and I need to know. The American people have a right to know what the source of all of that was in the beginning. Because at the end of the day, making sure that there's no foreign interference in our elections has been a priority for this administration. We've taken decisive steps. We've worked with the FBI.
Right?
We've worked with nations around the world to ensure
anything that the previous administration might have done. You know, you're talking about a FISA warrant on an innocent American.
Right.
They managed to get that because somehow they thought that Donald Trump was a Manchurian candidate. Whether or not they believed it or whether or not they were just, I mean, I thought it was pretty shoddy research, frankly. I mean, as a journalist, right, I would triple check everything if I were them. And yet they went on this Christopher Steele's dossier and used that as a reason. And so I guess I just ask, you know, aside from the foreign interference, what kind of negligence was happening back here at home?
Well, that's really what we need to understand. And the Inspector General's report will be coming out. And again, but the American people have a right to know here.
Sure.
I mean, think of what we went through as a nation over the last 2.5 years. And to find that, once again, there was no collusion, no obstruction, case closed. The American people still have a right to know where it all came from. And if people were engaged in improper behavior, people in the government, people in our intelligence community, they need to be held to account. But that being said, I'll tell you, in the midst of all of this, I couldn't be more proud of our record over the last 3 years. I mean, think of the progress we've made, rebuilding our military. I mean, reviving this economy with historic tax cuts, rolling back regulation. We celebrated today a historic number of conservatives confirmed to our federal courts at every level, 2 Supreme Court justices, and a president who is standing tall on the world stage, not apologizing for America, but standing up for America every single day.
Sure. No,
and we've done all of that. We've done all of that in the midst of Democrats, literally from the day we were inaugurated, talking about overturning the results of the 2016 election.
You and I have
still
talked
at
about
it, but Trish, the American people see through it.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that as I was traveling around the country over the last several weeks, talking about the USMCA, campaigning with great candidates in Mississippi and Louisiana and Kentucky, the American people stop me on the street and say, just tell the president we're with you. We understand what's going on. We're going to stand with you. And I have every confidence we're going to see that support come election day 2020.
The dysfunction right now, though, the divisiveness feels in some ways, and you and I have talked about Venezuela, very sort of Latin America or Banana Republic-like. I don't like seeing it because I feel like as an American that transition of power is so critical. And we send you guys there to work and to get stuff done. So that's good news on the jobs front, on the market front, et cetera, in spite of all of this. Let me turn to...
Think about this, 6.7 million new jobs created, wages rising at the fastest pace in 10 years, lowest unemployment in 50 years, lowest unemployment ever for African Americans and Hispanic Americans. I mean, this economy is booming. People's savings and pensions are soaring as the stock market is setting records, and it's all a result of the vision, the determination, and the resilience of a president who gets up every day and fights to keep the promises that he made to the American people.
The president tweeted that we need to have a war on these drug cartels. Horrible story in Mexico. I mean, just awful when I think of those little kids walking 5+ hours to try and seek help, of the 3 mothers being gunned down so violently. And it's right here at our border. This is real stuff. These cartels are vicious. They are dangerous, and they are very close to home, and in some cases active here in this country. Can we take that on? Should we take that on? And why isn't Mexico saying, hallelujah, thank you, help us take this on?
Well, first off, our hearts grieve for the family, the lives that were lost. American citizens, we're deeply saddened by the violence. But to your point, it reminds us of the prevalence of cartel violence, not just across Mexico, but just across our border. And yesterday, President Trump spoke to President Lopez Obrador and offered any assistance that Mexico might request. And I could tell on the call that President Lopez Obrador was grateful for that. We've forged a strong relationship with Mexico under President Trump's leadership. The truth is, Mexico's doing more today to help us secure our southern border than ever before in history. And in the last 4 months, apprehensions at our southern border are down by more than 70%. We have a ways to go, but Mexico is taking action. And President Trump wanted to make it clear that if they need our support combating violence in their country, that we're prepared to help them in any appropriate way. But it all underscores.
We did it with Colombia. We helped Colombia fight their cartels.
We did. And the president made it clear that we stand ready to assist Mexico should they ask us to do that. But it all underscores, Trish, just how important it is that we secure our border. I mean, the president declared an emergency on our southern border. We had a crisis of over 140,000 people a month coming across our border, and Democrats in Congress focused on anything but the best interests of the American people, said that it was a manufactured crisis. And so the president used those emergency powers. We've redirected resources, sent the National Guard to the border. We're building the wall even as we speak. And we've negotiated with Mexico to have people that are applying for asylum remain in Mexico, all of which has dramatically reduced the crisis on our southern border. But when you see the issue of illegal immigration, and you see the violence just across our border, it should remind every single American that President Donald Trump is absolutely right in standing firm on our agenda to secure our border. I couldn't be more honored that President Trump asked me to go to New Hampshire, to the State House, and file papers for his reelection as President of the United States. Election year is upon us, and we wanted to go to New Hampshire and file those papers that past vice presidents have had the privilege of doing. But I'm also going to take some time when I'm up there to talk about the record. Talk about what people don't hear about on many other cable television stations every day.
They got to keep watching Fox Business.
America standing tall in the world again. Our military rebuilt. Our economy revived. Our courts strengthened with constitutional conservatives. 2 on the Supreme Court, 160 lifetime appointments all across the nation that are strengthening the foundation of all the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution. It's a great story to tell, a growing American economy, and I'm looking forward to being up there.